How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Memdal, Daf 44 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, great Daf. On Daf 44, we learn about why Rava ruled the ox was treif. If you remember, we're actually in the middle of a kind of story kind of thing that we ended with yesterday. I stopped in the middle because we're actually getting up to something really interesting, and I would rather start with something really interesting than do it at the end when we're kind of at the end of the daf. Anyway, so we're going to start with that. It's going to be pretty. It's a big adol. There's a lot of interesting stuff on this daf. Anyway, so we're going to start with something interesting. And yeah, we had a story with Rava ruled that an ox was treif. We will remind ourselves what we're talking about there. Anyways, that's the first section of today. Then we discuss disconnecting the turbatz haveshet from the jaw. Did I say that right? Yeah. When the turbatz haveshet gets disconnected from the jaw, a little bit of a technical sugya over there. And then measuring the trachea, also a technical sugya, how to measure the trachea to see if it's halfway split and if it's treif. However, only the very beginning of it is technical. After that, it actually gets pretty interesting. So, friends, we've got some interesting stuff on Daf 44 to look forward to. So, friends, come join me. Let's enjoy the interesting stuff on Daf 44. So, friends, just to get us caught up from where we're at. Where we're at is that yesterday we saw on Mem Gimel Amud Beis a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel when it comes to the turbatz haveshet. The turbatz haveshet is the top part of the veshet, the top part of the esophagus, where it connects to the jaw. Now, there's a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel regarding how to handle and how to treat the turbatz haveshet. Rav says the turbatz haveshet is treated no different than the rest of the veshet, which means you could shecht there. It's within the scope, within the range of shechting. Just like the rest of the veshet, if it gets a hole that's any size, that's a kolshu, it will be a treifa. Shmuel relates to the turbatz haveshet in the exact opposite way. He says it is beyond the scope of shchita, and it is not treated like the rest of the veshet. And while by the rest of the veshet, if there's a hole any size, a puncture any size, the animal will be a treifa. Not so by the turbatz haveshet. It would have to be sliced through a majority of the way for it to be a treifa. So be'etzem Rav views the turbatz haveshet as the esophagus, as the rest of the veshet. Shmuel says we don't treat it as the rest of the veshet, and there are nafkamidas in terms of can you do shchita there, can't you do shchita, and how big of a hole would it be, how big of a puncture to make it treif. Now, there was a story that we got to at the end of the daf. The sons of Rav Ukva had an ox. Now, an ox is a big deal. I think you could feed a family for a whole year on an ox. I think. I don't know for sure, but that's like what I've seen. You can get quite a bit of meat out of an ox, I think. Anyways, so they slaughtered this ox, and it's a little bit controversial because they slaughtered it in the turbatz haveshet, right? The veshet was cut through at the turbatz haveshet. Now, the fact of the matter is, they shechted by the turbatz haveshet, but they didn't slice entirely through the turbatz haveshet. They started slicing through the turbatz haveshet, but they sliced down at an angle such that before they even got halfway through the veshet, it was already within kosher veshet area. So now, bein l'Rav, bein l'Shmuel, this ox should have been kosher, right? According to Rav, he says you're b'chlal allowed to shecht at the turbatz haveshet. It's like the rest of the veshet. So according to Rav, this ox would be kosher. According to Shmuel, also, even though he says that you're not allowed to slaughter and slice through the turbatz haveshet, but he says it's only a treif if you slice more than halfway through the turbatz haveshet. But by the time they were halfway through the slice, they were already angled in to the regular veshet. So you didn't have that majority of the turbatz haveshet slit. So bein l'Rav, bein l'Shmuel, this ox should have been kosher. Nonetheless, Rava said pasul, he said it's treif, and he fed it to the dogs. And Rab Abba said that Rava had to, right, Rava, not Rav, right, Rava. Rab Abba said that Rava had to pay back the sons of Rav Ukva. Now, when Rava said that this ox was a treif, he basically took the two chumras of both Rav and Shmuel, one chumrah from Rav, one chumrah from Shmuel. He took the chumrah from Shmuel that you're not allowed to shecht in the turbatz haveshet, and the chumrah of Rav that a puncture in the veshet any size would make the animal a treifa. So when you combine those two, Rava said, look, the animal was sliced at least a kolshu in the turbatz haveshet. And therefore it's not a place that's right for shechita, like Shmuel says, and it's the size of a kolshu, like Rav says. And therefore Rava says that the ruling that the ox is treif. Okay, now we're caught up, ready to move on. I have some water, which I'm going to drink a shluck of, and we'll go weiter. Now, we begin on Daf 43b, 2, 4, 5 lines from the bottom. Omer, Mar Brei Duravina, says Mar Brei Duravina. Mosvina tiyuvta klape sanoyoi dirava. We ask a question from a brisa against the enemies of Rava. It's a euphemism for Rava. I guess Mar Brei Duravina did not feel comfortable directly challenging Rava. Rava was a big gadol. So he said euphemistically that we have a question for the enemies of Rava. But he's bringing a brisa against Rava. That we say regarding Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Le'olam ilchasa k'divrei Beis Hillel. That the halacha is always like Beis Hillel, as we know. And peculiarly, the brisa continues and says, and if you want to paskin like Beis Shammai, no problem. You want to paskin like Beis Hillel, also no problem. Mikule Beis Shammai, Mikule Beis Hillel Rasha. But if you're only going to collect kulas, and you say, instead of saying, I'm going to be a Beis Hillel guy, or I'm going to be a Beis Shammai guy, you can say, you know what, I'm going to take all the leniencies of Beis Hillel, the leniencies of Beis Shammai, and I'll paskin like those. You're a Rasha, a wicked fellow, a shmendrik. Maybe a Rasha probably is not exactly a wicked guy, maybe it depends how you define it, but a Rasha, not a good guy to do that. It's not good to do it. Let's just say a spiritual Rasha at least. And if you do like the chumras of Beis Shammai and like the chumras of Beis Hillel, all of Akosavomer, the pasuk says about him, Haksil b'choshech holech, that the fool walks in darkness. And Rashi points out, and also Tosfos and Gimel Mebeis point out, that we're specifically talking about two chumras that contradict each other, which is precisely what Rava did. Rava paskin like two chumras that contradicted each other. Shmuel, when it comes to the turbatz haveshet, treats the turbatz haveshet unlike the veshet. He says it's not part of the veshet, and therefore you're not allowed to shech there, and the shear for a treifa is a majority. And Rav says the opposite. He says that what's it called again? The turbatz haveshet. That it's such an awkward word. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know like what it means. It's such a weird word. Just have to memorize it. The turbatz haveshet, Rav says it is part of the esophagus, and because it is part of the esophagus, you can shecht, and if there's a puncture any size, it can be possible. So it's going to make it a treifa. So Rav and Shmuel really are contradictory. Shmuel says it's not part of the turbatz haveshet is not part of the veshet. Rav says the turbatz haveshet is part of the veshet. And Rava took a chumrah from Rav and a chumrah from Shmuel, joined them together to say that this ox is a treifa. So now this brisa just said that if you take the chumras of Beis Shammai, the chumras of Beis Hillel, particularly when they are they contradict each other, all of Akasav Omer Aksil B'choshech Olech, that a fool walks in darkness, and seemingly Rava did just this. Not with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, but with Rav and Shmuel, he took two conflicting chumras and used it to declare an ox treif. Ella, rather, what do? Ike Beis Shammai, kikulein v'kichumrein. Look, if you're going to do like Beis Shammai, so then go like Beis Shammai ad asof. Whenever they are mekil, so you do like those kulas. Whenever they're machmir, which is most of the time, you do like their chumras. Ike Beis Hillel, and if you're going to do like Beis Hillel, kikulein v'kichumrein, you got to take the whole package. You do like their kulas, but also like their chumras. You can't pick and choose. So the question, so Marbrei Durabina is Be'etzim asking, I don't understand how Rava chose these conflicting, these contradictory chumras in order to passel the treifa. Now says the Gemara, Hagufa Kasha. One second, I don't understand, right? I'm sure many of us were thinking this when we looked at this brisa milichatchila. On the one hand, Omar le'olam alocha k'divrei Beis Hillel. On the one hand, the brisa starts off by saying the halacha is like Beis Hillel. We always follow Beis Hillel. What does it say immediately after that? What? I don't understand. The halacha is like Beis Hillel, and if you want to do like Beis Shammai, what? We look to halacha as a way to know what to do. If I ask you what's the halacha, it's because I want to know what to do. You tell me, okay, this is the halacha, but you can also do like what's the halacha? I don't say this is the halacha, but you can also do the opposite of the halacha. I don't understand what's going on here. Lo kashin ish geferlich kan kodem baskol kan la'achar baskol. So answered the Gemara, well, of course, the famous baskol. Who wants to tell us about the famous baskol? The famous baskol from Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis of Masechta Eruvin. We're going to learn about another famous baskol in a second that we've already learned about. Anyways, Masechta Eruvin, Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim ve'alocha ki Beis Hillel. A voice came out from heaven and said, look, Beis Hillel is mamish the holiest, Beis Shammai is mamish the holiest. We paskin like Beis Hillel, however. So when the Brisa says, if you want to do like Beis Shammai, Givaldig, you want to do like Beis Hillel, Ochid Givaldig, that was before the Baskol says we do like Beis Hillel. But when the Brisa says that the halacha is like Beis Hillel, that was after the Baskol, when it was determined that the halacha always follows Beis Hillel. Alternatively, I'll give you a different suggestion. Afla Acher Baskol. You could say that, no, the whole Brisa is talking post-Baskol. Okay, so if it's after the Baskol, so then why? Right, if it's after the heavenly voice, so then how come we are saying, if you want, you could do like Beis Shammai? Rabbi Yoshua, it's like Rabbi Yoshua, the Omar, ein mashgichim bebaskol. And it's like Rabbi Yoshua, who says ein mashgichim bebaskol. Where does Rabbi Yoshua say ein mashgichim bebaskol? By another very famous baskol, Daf Nun Tes of Amud Beis of Masechta Bov Metzia, the last daf, or the second to last daf of Perek Hazov, the famous Tanu Shelachnai. When there's machlokes of Eliezer and the Chachamim regarding a certain oven, a Mishnah Masechta Kelim, Rabbi Eliezer says it's tahor, the Chachamim say it's tamei, and Rabbi Eliezer is so convinced that he's right that he said all sorts of stuff. Ultimately, he says, you know what? If I'm right, the heavens should announce that I'm right. And the heavens announced that he's right. And Rabbi Yeshua says, doesn't matter. Lo b'shamayim hi. The Torah is not in heaven. The Torah is here on earth. And therefore, the halacha is acharab lahatos. We go based on the majority, and the majority, the chacham say that the oven is tamei, so it is tamei. Now, okay, so we can say that when the Brisa says that if you want passing like Beis Hillel, passing like Beis Shammai, you can say that's like Rabbi Yeshua, who says that lo b'shamayim we don't passing like the Baskol. But when we say do like Beis Hillel, so that is like the Baskol that says that we pass like Beis Hillel. Tosfos asks a very gewaldige question. Tosfos says, well, I'm a little confused. Tosfos says, I'm a little confused. Do we listen to Baskols or don't we listen to bas kols? On the one hand, we were just talking about two different bas kols. And lemaise, in one case we do listen to bas kols, and in the other case we don't listen to bas kols. In Eruvin and Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim v'alocha ke Beis Hillel. That is the famous bas kol from which, at that point, it was determined that we always will paskin like Beis Hillel, because a voice came out of heaven and established for the Yidden the halacha. We always paskin like Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai b'makom Beis Hillel eino Mishnah. We always paskin like Beis Hillel because of that famous bas kol, the heavenly voice that said paskin like Beis Hillel. So apparently we do listen to bas kols. What about the Tana Shel Achnai? What happened by the Tana Shel Achnai in Babble Metzia? Rabbi Eliezer says, if I'm right, a bas kol should say I'm right. A bas kol says Rabbi Eliezer is right. We don't listen to the bas kol. So when do we listen to bas kol? When don't we listen to bas kol? Tosfos asks. Givaldige kasha. Gives two answers. Answer number one is that we do listen to bas kols, and that's why we paskin like Beis Hillel. The bas kol says we paskin like Beis Hillel, and therefore we paskin like Beis Hillel. So what happened by the Tana Shel Achnai in Babble Metzia? That was different. That wasn't a bas kol coming to make a proclamation for the Yidden. Rabbi Eliezer was a tzaddik. Rabbi Eliezer was the great Tana, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus says, I want a bas kol to confirm that I'm right. He'll get a bas kol to confirm that he's right, but that's not an authoritative bas kol that, Rabbi Eliezer, right? Tzaddik goes to Kadosh Baruch Hu Mekayev. I don't know when you say that, when you don't, but one is, if Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus asks for a bas kol, he's going to get a bas kol. But that isn't an authoritative bas kol that's telling us what to do. That's a bas kol that was fulfilling the request of Rabbi Eliezer. But really, in general, we will listen to a bas kol. The Tana Shel Achnai was a kind of a unique situation. That's answer number one. Answer number two is no, we don't listen to bas kols. We don't listen to bas kols. We don't listen to bas kols. Rather, what happened in Eruvin, when the bas kol came and said, the halacha is like Beis Hillel, that's awesome, and it's a great story, but that isn't really ultimately why we're passing like Beis Hillel. You know why we're passing like Beis Hillel? Because Beis Hillel was more numerous than Beis Shammai. The pasuk says, Achrei Rab lahatos, we always follow the majority. The fact of the matter is, Beis Hillel was more numerous than Beis Shammai, but Beis Shammai was sharper. And there was a suffix. Do we go based on the rove? But even though, of course, Achrei lahatos, but Beis Shammai, they're pretty sharp guys. Maybe we should pass like them. Comes the bas kol, says we're passing like Beis Hillel. They say, okay, fine, we get the point. Yep, the Torah says Achrei lahatos. We're doing like that. We're going to go based on the majority. Now, when it came to the Tana Shel Achnai, who was the majority? The Chachamim. So we go by the Chacham, by the Tana Shel Achnai, Babble Metzia. So the reason why we go like Beis Hillel and Eruvin and like the Chacham and Babble Metzia has nothing to do with whether we listen to bas kols or not. It actually has to do with who's the majority. In Eruvin, Beis Hillel was the majority. In Babble Metzia, the Chacham were the majority. That's the second answer of Tosfos. Very, very interesting stuff. Will you agree? Let's go weiter. So now back to the very exciting Gemara. This is why I wanted to start with this. At the end of the daf, we're tired. Also, last night, Bichlal, it was already, I had been up since, I don't know what time I had been up since, very, very, very early, and it was already like 8:30 at night. I was tired. This requires excitement and energy. Come on, that was Givaldi, right? Right. Okay. Now, it says the Gemara, Mikol Makom Kasha. Great. After we had that really exciting sugya about Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, and bas kols, back to our question. What is the dilio with Rava? After all, the Brisa says that if you take the chumras of Beis Hillel and the chumras of Beis Shammai, when they contradict each other, haksil b'choshech holech. Why was Rava adapting contradictory chumras to make a ox, a treifa, which he ended up having to pay for anyways? Okay. So Amar Rav Tavus, says Rav Tavus, Kula kirav avda. Okay, says Rav Tavus, actually, Rava was not being contradictory. He was paskening like Rav. Mapatom is paskening like Rav. According to Rav, it should have been a kosher shchita. Why is it a treifa? I'll tell you why. Also Rami bar Yecheskel. This is also very interesting. Who is Rami bar Yecheskel? The brother of Rav Yehuda bar Yecheskel. Who's Rav Yehuda bar Yecheskel? Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, the first Rosh Yeshiva of Pumbedisa, as far as I'm aware. So, Rami bar Yecheskel, the brother of Rav Yehuda bar Yecheskel. So the Chiyasa Rami bar Yecheskel Amar, he says, Lo tatsisu lehu lahane klale, don't listen to these rules. De Kail Yehuda Achi Mishmei de Rav, that my brother Yehuda, Rav Yehuda, was saying in the name of Rav. Now Rashi says something very interesting, which I can't say with 100% confidence I understand it, but I'll say it how I understand it, and it's really interesting. What does Rashi say? I'll read it. It's pretty much to the right and slightly lower than where we are in the Gemara. It says, and the Dibra Maskul Kasha, Mikol Makom Kasha, one line below that. Stam Shmait say de Rab Bidari Basroi. That when you have a Shita of Rav being referred to in later generations, right? So for example, here we have this Machlekes Rav and Shmuel, and it's being discussed by Rava. Rava is a later generation. Rav Yehuda Ava Amrlu B'Bei Midrash, Rav Yehuda said them in the Beis HaMedrash. Now what exactly does that mean? It can't mean that Rav Yehuda said this teaching of Rav. What teaching of Rav? That the turbatz haveshet is part of the veshet, and that it's treif b'mashu. It cannot be that Rava was in the Beis HaMedrash and Rav Yehuda was giving a shir and he was saying over the shita of Rav, and that's how Rava learned it. Because of course the Gemara in Kedushin says that when Rav Yehuda died, Rava was born. They didn't overlap. So what does it mean that the later generations heard these teachings of Rav from Rav Yehuda? I don't know. I'm imagining what it means is that it's basically filtered to the Masorah of Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda was a Talmud of Rav as well as a Talmud of Shmuel. He was also the Rosh Yeshiva of Pumbedisa. And I think maybe what it's saying is that when the later generations are discussing these machlokes of Rav and Shmuel, even though it doesn't say here Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, it says machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Nonetheless, this was the tradition of Rav as filtered through, as passed down by Rav Yehuda. That's how I understand it, which is very interesting. That basically Rav Yehuda was basically the Masorah of Rav, right? That the later generations, when they discuss the shita of Rav, it's the shita of Rav as passed down to them from Rav Yehuda. I don't know if anybody else has any other insight there. Let us know. That's how I understand it. Very, very interesting stuff. Akoponim. So comes Rami bar Yecheskel, and Rami bar Yecheskel says, this is not what Rav said. Whatever my brother Yehuda was saying, Rav says, he didn't actually say it. Rav didn't actually say it. Rather, Lo tatzisulu la'ani klale dechayil Yehuda achi mishmei de Rav. Unless you could say, Rami bar Yecheskel is Rav Yehuda's brother. So maybe this whole incident and what Rashi is commenting on was maybe in the same generation of Rav. Maybe this isn't commenting on Rava. Maybe he was just saying, look, I know that you all know the shita of Rav because my brother Rav Yehuda was saying it in the Beis HaMedrash. Well, don't listen to that. Anyways, it could be it's a combination of both. Anyways, fine. Interesting question. Anyways, so Rami bar Yecheskel says, Lo tatzisulu laniklal dechal Yehuda achi mishmei de Rav. Don't listen to these, to what my brother Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Hochi amar Rav. I'll tell you what Rav really said. Veshet, that when it comes to the veshet, when it comes to the esophagus, nasnu bo chachamim shir. There was a limit. There was a range. It wasn't just all the way up to the jaw, as we understood Rav to be, that it's just part of the rest of the veshet. The veshet ends. It ends before the turbatz haveshet. The turbatz haveshet, according to Rav, says Rami bar Yecheskel, according to Rav, the turbatz haveshet is out of range. Michal the turbatz haveshet lav makom shchitahu. The turbatz haveshet is not an appropriate place for shchita. V'ka'amar b'mashu. And Rav says that it becomes treif b'mashu. So Rava was right, or at least Rava was passing like Rav, He wasn't just mixing and matching chumras from Rav and Shmuel. It's not ve'aksil b'choshech olech. Rava was paskening like Rav, that the turbatz haveshet is not part of the veshet, and you can't do shchita there, and it's treif b'mashu, and that's why he said it's a treifa. And a shtick of water, we're going to go weiter. How are you enjoying this daf? It's amazing, right? Okay. The Maila ad kama. Okay, so where does the veshet go up to? Where does it end? By the throat, by the jaw. Rav Nachman ad kidei tfisas yad. Beis says, Rav Nachman, if you take your hand and you grab onto the veshet from the jaw, so wherever your hand ends, that's where the veshet begins. Limata ad kama, and where does it end? In the direction of the stomach. Rav Nachman, Rav Barvua, ad kidei sheyasir, until the hairs begin. What hairs are we talking about in the esophagus? So let's take a look at a slide. These are the stomach hairs. What we're looking at over here is the keres, the stomach that has been flipped inside out. So you're looking at what's going on inside the stomach. So what you see there, you see these two labels. The upper label says dofen hakeres mibifnim. That's the flipped out, right? The stomach that they flipped out, inside out. And then the lower label is pointing to the veshet, right? That's the inner white inside of the veshet. Now, so the veshet goes into the stomach, and in the stomach there are all of these hairs. I don't know what's the medical term. Neil, Sharna, who else? We have a new friend here at Babble Talmud named Rabbi Yitzchok. Rabbi Yitzchok, maybe tell us about these hairs. What's their official name? Al Koponim. So their hair. Those are the hairs that we're talking about. Those like stuff that probably absorb like water and stuff and whatever they absorb. Okay. Anyways, so back in the Gemara. So limata ad kama, where does the veshet end? Rav Nachman, Rav Barvua ad kidei sheyasir, which we're understanding to mean basically until the keres, until the stomach, until the first stomach, because as we saw in the photo, those hairs that we're talking about are in the stomach. So basically, from about a tefach away from the jaw, all the way down to the stomach. Ini, really, all the way down to the stomach. V'amar Ravina, Omar Gniva Mishmei Derav. Tefach biveshet, that the first tefach of the veshet from the stomach, samuch lekeres, next to the stomach, zeu keres apnimi, this is the keres apnimi. Chavid, do you remember in the Mishnah there was this kind of tricky bit about if the keres apnimi is punctured? A keres apnimis shenikva, that if the inner stomach gets punctured, it's a treifa. And we said by the outer stomach, if it's torn, it depends how much it's torn. Anyways, so this is the inner stomach. Okay, that a tefach b'veshet samuch lekeres, that the tefach of the esophagus as it gets right next to the stomach, that is what's called zeu keres apnimi. That is what's called the inner stomach. So amai ki kashachit b'keres kashachit. But if we're saying that you can shecht down to the hairs of the stomach are in the stomach. So that means you could shecht down to the stomach. But at the same time, Rav says that the tefach before the stomach begins is already considered the inner stomach. So you're basically shechting the stomach? How does that make sense? So Ema, I'll say tefach bikeres samuch leveshet zeu keres apnimi. No, rather I'll say that the veshet all the way down to the stomach is in fact the veshet, and then the first tefach of the stomach is what's called the keres apnimi, the inner stomach, and that's because the first part of the stomach is like still in the rib cage, surrounded, right, the breastbone below and the rib cage above, but then the rest of it is like outside of the past the breastbone. And I think there's a name for a breastbone. I don't remember what it is. Anyway, so anything outside of that would be called the outer stomach, according to this. Alternatively, you could say that when Rav says that the tefach that's close to the stomach, one answer was that the inner stomach is the first tefach of the stomach. But we can also keep it, as we said before, that it is the tefach that is close to the stomach, so the last tefach of the esophagus. Okay, but is Rav then saying you could check the esophagus? No. Rav was talking about an ox. An ox has a lot of these hairs, such that it even starts a tefach up from the stomach in the esophagus. So you would not be allowed to shech there, and that was already called the turbatz ha-keres. The turbatz haveshet. Okay, givaldik. So we answered why Rava ruled that the ox was treif. We had a whole interesting discussion about Basil Beishamai. We were wondering why he ruled that the ox was treif. If he was passing the chumrah like this. Anyways, we said comes Rami by Yecheskel, and he says no, Taki was passing like Rav. And now we have a discussion about disconnecting the turbatz haveshet from the jaw. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Turbatz haveshet shenital kulo milechi kosher. If the turbatz haveshet has been disconnected from the jaw, it is kasher. Betana tuna, and our Tana teaches on Daf Nun Daled, nita lechi atachton kosher, that if the lower jaw is removed, the animal is kosher. It's not a treifa. So we see if the lower jaw is removed, and if the lower jaw is removed, of course, the trachea, the esophagus, are going to be disconnected from it. And yet the Mishnah says it's kosher. So we see, like Shmuel says, that if the turbatz haveshet is disconnected from the jaw, it remains kosher. Maskefler Rav Papa says, Mapitom, this doesn't make any sense. Va'ika ikur simanim. For you are disconnecting the simanim. Of course, one of the 5 psuls of shchita is ikur. As machlokes, what exactly ikur is, but according to some very important opinions, like we saw the Bahag quoted in Tosfos on Daf Tes, the Rambam, the Ramban, say that ikur is this, precisely, if the simanim get disconnected from the jaw. So, I mean, this is a big problem. And even if you say that that's not what ikur is, it would still be a treifa. So what's going on over here? Well, there are puppet kasha masnisin, but at the same time, sure, Rav Papa is raising a valid concern that isn't this ikur simanim? Isn't this a problem? But at the same time, the Mishnah does say nita lechi atachton kosher, that if the lower jaw is removed, it's kosher. Doesn't that mean that the simanim are disconnected? Bishlam masnisin Rav Papa lo kasher. We say, okay, no, we can resolve that. That's resolvable. Hadi iakure. Look, if you're going to uproot the jaw and uproot the simanim from the jaw, yeah, that's going to be a problem, like Rav Papa is flagging. Ha di igume me ilavi simanim. But you can cut out the jaw bone while preserving the meat of the jaw and the simanim still connected, and that is what the Mishnah is talking about, that it is kasher. But everything remains connected. I guess if it got cut out somehow. So Ela l'Shmuel, kasha, but according to Shmuel, it's a problem because he's saying that the gemamish be disconnected. Lo tema kulo ela ema rube. So don't say that the turbatz haveshet can be entirely severed and disconnected from the jaw, because that would be an issue of ikur simanim. Shmuel is saying that it's just mostly disconnected from the jaw. But didn't Rabba bar Bachana say in the name of Shmuel that simanim that are disconnected, that are severed most of the way, are treifa? Amar Rav Shisha bar Rav Idi ha de akpo de ikapel ikapule hasam de ifruk afruke. It depends. if it's like peeled off, right? It's like when you peel something off and then you let go, it kind of like flaps back to like where it was. So if you peeled it off most of the way, then that is okay. That's what you're most talking about. But if you like yank it off and now it's just like disconnected in random places, then that would be a problem. All right. And we now get to the final section of today's daf, measuring the trachea. The first line or two of this section is going to be technical. The rest will not. Says the Gemara, Ufsukas Agrogeris. So the Mishnah had said that if the trachea is cut, you find that the trachea has been like broken, so it's a treif. Kama psukas gargeres. How broken does it have to be? As we know for a long time already. Beruba, most of the way by the trachea. Bechama ruba. Now, how do we measure rov? Rav Omar rov ovia ve'amila rov chalala. Rav says a majority of its thickness. Some say a majority of its whole, of its space. What does that mean? So here I have a diagram that should make explaining this and understanding it much easier, I hope. So here in this diagram, we have the esophagus. Now basically, what are we looking at? So you have the esophagus. Now if you notice at the bottom of the esophagus, right, if we're just looking at the kind of tip that's staring at us, that's inviting us to look inside of it, looking into the hole, that's what we're focusing on, the hole and what surrounds it. So if we look at that hole, so the bottom, when I talk about the bottom, I'm talking about the bottom of like that ring, okay, where it comes to a point. And so the bottom of the trachea is much thicker, right? You have the hole in the middle, and then there's a ring surrounding it on top. And then at this part of the haveshet, it actually, the trachea, the kane, it comes to a point at the bottom, but the bottom, where the ring surrounds it at the bottom is much thicker than where it surrounds it at the top. Now, just in this photo, that's at the bottom. Really, technically, on the animal, that would really be the other way around. But anyways, this is how it was in the Hillel book. Okay, so now, when we say rov ovyo, we're measuring from the top of the ring to the bottom of the ring. When we say rov chalalo, we're measuring just the hole, just the space. So what does that mean in practice? So if you look to the right of the photo, I have some lines. The red lines are measuring the halfway mark from, if you were to measure from the top of the ring to the very bottom of the ring. And then we have the red line exactly halfway between the outsides of the trachea. And the dark green lines are measuring just the hole, just the space there that we could look into. And then in the middle, there is a dark green line exactly halfway in the middle of the hole. I'm going to drink a little water and then we're going to explain what's going on here. So as you could see, because the ring that surrounds the hole is not even, if the ring that surrounded the hole was even, so then the halfway mark between the outside as well as the hole would be exactly the same. But because it's not even and it's thicker at the bottom, so actually the halfway mark of the measuring from the outside versus the halfway mark measuring just the hole are different. And what does that mean, therefore, for us? Well, imagine that you have a trachea that's been broken. And says Rashi, it's more likely that it's going to break from the thicker part, possibly because that's where it's attached to that's where it's kind of goes side by side, it's connected to the esophagus, maybe because of all the movement in the esophagus, maybe it can somehow break, I don't know. But apparently it's more likely for it to break there. So now if the break is originating from like the point at the bottom of the esophagus, well then we're saying that if once it goes more than halfway, once the break is more than halfway, it's going to be a treif. So going from the bottom of the trachea, so if you go for the bottom of the trachea, now look in the middle at those lines in the middle. You'll see you hit the red line before you hit the dark green line. Meaning, if we're measuring the ovia, if we're measuring the external space, so actually when there's a break originating from the bottom, you're going to hit the midway mark and the halfway mark of the external measurement before you hit the halfway mark of the internal measurement. Which means that once you hit, so if we're measuring by the external measurement, it'll become a treif earlier than it would than if we are using the internal measurement. As you can see that the middle line of the internal measurement is higher up than the internal line of the external measurement. So you have a little bit more leeway if we go based on the internal measurement, that if there's a break, a sever that begins at the bottom of the trachea, until it reaches more than halfway, you'll have more slack if we're going based on the inner measurement. All that is to say, that's it. We are now done with the technical part, and all that is to say is that the ovio, measuring based on the external measurement, is more stringent than if we go based on halalo, based on the inner measurement. You have more slack that way. Now, let's start from the beginning. So Tana Kama Psokas Agageres Beruba, a majority of the way. Becham Beruba, what's the majority? Rav Omar says Rav Rov Ovya, the majority of the thickness, the external measurement, which is Machmir. Ba'amr La, some say Rov Chalala, the internal space, which is more lenient. Hai Psukas Agargeres Dasoy Lekam Derab. There was a severed, right? Somebody had checked an animal and they saw that the trachea was severed, so they brought it before Rab. Yosef Kabadik La Berov Ovya, and he was having a look and he was measuring the external measure, the more stringent measure. Amrulay Rav Kahana Rav Asi were there. They said to Rab, Limateni Rabbeinu, you taught us Berov Chalala, that it goes based on the internal measurement, the more lenient measurement. And if you go based on the more lenient measurement, this would be a kosher animal. So don't make it a treif. So what did Rab do? I'm going to leave you in suspense while I take a shluck of water. So Rab sent it to Rabba Bar Chana. Shaja lekam to Rabba Bar Chana. He sent the trachea to Rabba Bar Chana. Bodka. Rabba Bar Chana checked it. Berov Chalala, in the inner space, the more lenient measurement. Be'achshra, and says it's kosher. Not only did he say that this is a kosher animal, v'zovan mina betleser istire pshite bisra, and he bought some meat. Without going into the details of how much money what are tleser istire pshite. Whatever, istire is a sela, but it's not a sela. I think it's not a sela tsori. I think it's sela medina. It's the one that's the smaller amount. Anyways, so he bought meat from it. So not only did Rabbi Bar Chana say that this is a kosher animal, he got in on it. He said, and I would like to buy some of its meat. How could it be that if Rav said that it was treif, that Rabbi Bar Chana would say that it's kosher? If one chacham says tamei, a different chacham cannot say tahor. Asr in chaver rasha latir. If one chacham says asr, the other one cannot say mutter. Shani yacha, over here it's not a big deal. The Rav lo asr meser. Rav never said it was asr. Before he had an opportunity to say asr, he was stopped by Rav Kahana and Rav Asi, who suggested that he get a second opinion. And that second opinion said kosher. But now the Gemara asks another question. That, okay, so we said that Rabbi Bar Chana says that it's mutter, and then what happened? He says it's kosher, and he says, I want in. I would like to buy meat. How could he have eaten that meat? This was meat, right? Became the ori b'chacham. This is meat that there was a suffix about whether it's kosher or not. And as we learned a week ago, and as we're about to learn again now, I hope this will be familiar, that it's a virtue, as we see, right? Yechezkel, as we're about to see, Yechezkel says to Rabban Shalom that he never even ate meat about which there was a question that had to be consulted, that a rabbi had to be consulted about. Even if it ended up being kosher, I wouldn't eat it. If there was any suffix, I stayed away from it. So why was Rabbi Bar Chana eating this meat and saying, I'd like to buy some, if clearly this was meat that that was questionable, that he was called in, that Rava already had a look at it, he then called him in to have a look at it as well. Why would he be eating this meat? V'aksiv, the Pasuk says in Yechezkel, V'omar, and I said to the Rabban Shalom, Aho Hashem Elokim minei nafshi lo mitumah, my soul is not impure. Unevelu treifa lo yachalti min urai v'ad ota, and I never ate nevela, I never ate treifas. V'lo ba b'fi b'sar pigel, I never ate pigel. Hinei nafshi lo mitumah lo hirharti bayom lavolidei tuma balala, I never thought inappropriate thoughts that would lead to nocturnal emissions. Unevelu treifa lo achalti, and I never ate nevela, I never ate treifa. Shlo achalti b'sar kos me'olam. Right? This came up. We saw this the other day in terms of can you eat a sick animal? Are sick animals kosher? And we see that Yechezkel says, I would never eat an animal that anybody had to say quickly shecht it before it dies. That was a virtue. V'laba, meaning it's not that the sick animal is forbidden, but he chose to stay away from it. I never ate from an animal that was questionable. That even if it turned out that the psak was its kosher, I didn't eat it. If there was a question, I stayed away from it. I never ate from an animal where the matnos kahuna that we're going to learn about in a later parak in Masechta Chullin, I never ate from an animal where the matnos kahuna were not given to the kohen. No. So how could it be? Why would Rabbi Bar Chana have eaten from this animal if clearly it was sent to him because there was a question about it? Hanemile milsa detalia besvara, that would refer to a psak that was based on rationale, on reasoning. Meaning, if there was questionable meat and it was sent to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, wow, it's a tricky case. There isn't any specific beferish halacha in Shulchan Aruch that says that it's mutter, but I think that it makes sense to say that it's mutter. That is the kind of meat that Yechezkel would not eat. However, Rabbi Bar Chana, and the type of meat that we would be surprised if Rabbi Bar Chana would eat. However, Rabbi Bar Chana agmare samach. Rabbi Bar Chana says, look, it's a beferish halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. He says, I've learned about this case. This is measured by the inner space, right, by the inside of the trachea, and it is kosher. There's no question about it, and that is why he said, I would like to buy some. Okay, but still, another question. Doesn't it look weird? There is a questionable animal. They send it to Rabbi Bar Chana to see if it's kosher or not. He says, oh yeah, this is kosher. I'd like to buy it. That looks a little weird. It's like, he's saying, it's kosher and now I want to buy some. It's like, well, is it really kosher or do you just want to buy some? Kilu, I don't think we'd really suspect about, but like, maybe other peoples might suspect. Maybe the Yentis in the bungalow colony on Shabbos afternoon, they're like, what's the deal with Rabbi Bar Chana? Was it really kosher or did he just want to buy meat? Didn't want to go to the store? Anyways, the point is, right, this is not something you want to do. The Tana is, we're learning a brisa, Danis Adin, Zika V'chiyeh, for example, if you have somebody, a judge, who judged the case, he said, so-and-so is awarded money, so-and-so needs to pay money, Timei V'tir, this is tar, this is tamei, also V'hitir, this is mutter, this is also, V'chena Eidim, also witnesses, She'idu, who testified, Kulin Rashayin Likach. So for example, let's say there was a court case about a field. Does the field belong to Reuven? The field belong to Shimon? They awarded the field to Shimon. Technically, immediately after that, they could start doing business with Shimon. Maybe they want to buy the field from Shimon. There technically is nothing wrong with that, right? As long as they judged fairly and there was no foul play in the judgment. There's nothing prohibiting them from then buying it from Shimon, but it looks bad. Stay away from ugly things, and that which is similar to that. Meaning, it definitely doesn't look amazing, or you can understand why people might raise flags and say, what's the deal with that, by the way? Isn't it strange that they judged that the field belongs to Shimon and then they immediately bought it from him? Did it really belong to Shimon, or did they just want to buy it from him? Anyways, so that's the question that we're asking here as well. Like, do we need to be concerned about just staying away from a situation like this? A situation where Rabbi Bachana would say, oh yeah, this animal is kosher and I'd like to buy some. Hanimile midi de mizab mishuma. Look, that concern is something that is not based on a beferish halach and shulchan aruch. Something that's subjective, something that's based on evaluation, something that's based on collecting evidence and relying upon a judgment. In a situation like that, it looks pretty bad that the judges are judging that the field belongs to Shimon and then they immediately buy it from him. Hacha, but over here, maskila muchach, but over here there's really nothing to be concerned about. Like, what are we concerned that he's going to get a better price? That here he is, he's poskening that, yeah, this is a kosher animal and now I want to buy some. Why are we concerned that maybe he's just trying to get a better price for himself? Weigh the meat. There's the going rate of meat in the market. Take out the scale, take out the meat that he bought, put it on the scale, weigh it, and you'll have your answer. So when there are red flags or things that like aren't as easily provable, here, like what's the concern? He posking that it's kosher, and now he's just trying to get a better price on this animal that he says is kosher, maybe get better treatment. Take out the scale. We'll see how much it weighs. We'll see how much it costs. We'll see how much he paid. We can answer any questions. Anybody's going to raise any problems, we can simply answer it. Kiha the Rava, it's like Rava shara treif. Rava, somebody brought over an animal to see if it was treif or not, and he says, no, it's not treif, it's kosher. V'zavan mina bisra. And then he went and he purchased meat from this person. Amalei Rav Chizda, the daughter of Rav Chizda, his wife, says to him, Abba, my father would not do that. My father would not have done that. My father would not have said that this is a kosher animal and then bought from that animal. My father, shari buchra v'lo zavan mine bisra. My father, if somebody came over, if a kohen came over with a bechor, now a bechor, a firstborn animal, it's like a firstborn male sheep or something, so you give it to the kohen. But nowadays, of course, there's no korbanos. So what are you going to do with the bechor? So you leave it till it gets a mum. Once it gets a mum, so you can pashut eat it. Once it gets a mum, you can eat it. You don't have, normally buy a korban, if you have like a korban shlamim or something, it gets a mum, so it's still kadosh. You then have to redeem it and take its money and buy a new one, and it becomes chulin. But the money is but the money is holy. You have to redeem it first. When it comes to a bechor, if it gets a mum, you could partially just eat it. So my father, when he would paskin that a bechor has a mum and you can eat it, he would not then buy it from the kohen who came over to see if it had a mum. So Rava paskin that this animal was kosher, and then he went and bought some meat from it. His wife pointed out that her father, Rav Chizda, never would have done that. And she says that when it came to bechors, people came over to see if their bechors had a mum. He would say, yeah, it has a mum. He would not then buy it from them. So Rava explained that there's a difference between a treifa and a bechor. Buchra, when it comes to bechor, the ashuma mizdabin. Hanimili buchra the ashuma mizdabin. Bechors are sold based on evaluation. Hacha maskila muchach. But over here, let's just take out the scales and weigh it. What does this mean? Who can explain this to us? I'm just taking a slug of water. What this means is the following. As I mentioned a minute ago, if you have a korban shlamim, for example, and that shlamim gets a mum, so what do? You can't offer it as a korban. So you can sell it And then that money, you'll take that money and you'll use that money to buy a new korban. So now the question is, how much are you going to sell it for? So here's the thing. That animal was set aside to be a korban shlomim. It's kadosh. To take a animal that's kadosh to the market and to weigh it in the market with all of the rest of the chulin animals is bizyon kachin. Is bizyon kachin. That's not an appropriate way to handle a korban, even if it got a mum. It's not an appropriate way to handle a korban, to go to the market, go to the butcher, say, hey, weigh my animal for me so that I can figure out what price I can get for it. It's bizyon kachim, it's not nice. But in the case of a korban shlomim, there is an interest. We actually do want to get the best price we can for it, because the more money we get for it, then the more money we'll be able to spend on a new animal to bring a replacement korban shlomim. So in consideration of that, even though it's bizyon kachim, we prioritize getting a better price for it, and we say, you know what, you can weigh it. Go to the market, go to the butcher, ask him to weigh it for you. It's not ideal, but we do want to get the best price for it. When it comes to a bechor, however, a bechor that gets a mum belongs to the kohen. It's no longer kadosh. It belongs to the kohen. He can eat it right away. And if he sells it, who keeps the money? He keeps the money. So in that case, we say, okay, it's bizyon kachim. We're not going to allow, meaning this bechor, it gets a mum, you can eat it right away. Kilu, it's still we don't want to treat it with bizarre, you can eat it right away, but kilu, if he sells it, he gets the money, he doesn't need a briar, or the money is not kadosh or whatever. So therefore, we don't allow him to take that bechor that has a mum to the market and to weigh it to figure out what the best price is, because it's bizyon kachim and that money is just going to him. But therefore, he's at a disadvantage. He says, this is how much I want for the sheep. Somebody says, no, I'm not paying you that much. I'm paying you less. And he can't weigh it. He can't weigh it to say, look, this is what it's bizyon kachim to weigh it like you would weigh any other chulin. So therefore, he's going to have to compromise and settle on a lower price. Therefore, Rava points out that when Rav Chizda wouldn't buy the bechor, that's because it was subjective. It could look weird that maybe he's trying to negotiate for himself a better price, and he's benefiting from the situation. So that's why Rav Chizda wouldn't do it. But over here, what is the concern? But over here, I said the animal is kosher. Somebody said maybe it's treif. I said no, it's kosher, and I paid market value for it. Micah, what's anybody's concern? Mishum umtzum ayiso. What is anybody concerned? Maybe I took the best meat for myself. I'll tell you something. Kol yomo umtzum ayiso zavnuli. Fact of the matter is, every time I go to the market, the butcher memela takes out the best meat that he has and gives it to me, because out of honor, they always just take out the best meat and offer me the best meat anyway. So there's really no advantage that I'm getting here. I'm paying the same price as market price, and I'm getting the same meat as I always get. So therefore, he explained to his wife that over here, there really should not be an issue. And now to wrap up the daf, Amr of Chizde says of Chizde, Ezu Talmud Chacham. Who is a Talmud Chacham? Tosfos says, the Madrinan le Avidasu b'Tvias Ayin, Gemara in Babble Mitzia, that if a Talmud Chacham says, yeah, that is my lost object that I lost, so we could say, okay, fine, he's a Talmud Chacham, we're going to trust him. So who is such a Talmud Chacham? Ze'aroeh treif la'atzmo. Somebody who objectively looks at his own treifas and says, you know what, this ox that I just slaughtered, that I could feed my family with for a whole year, it's a treif. I'm throwing it in the garbage. That's a Talmud Chacham that if he says, I lost an object, and that's it, we'll trust him. The Amr of Chizda says, of Chizda, Ezu sone matonis yichya. When the pasuk says, and those who hate gifts will live, who's that? Zaroa treif la'atzmo. That is somebody who objectively looks at his own treifas and says, yeah, this is treif, I got to throw it in the garbage. If that's how his relationship with his own stuff, certainly he doesn't need anybody else's stuff. Darish Marzutra, Mishmeidu of Chizde, Kol Misha Kore, anybody who learns Tanakh, Vishone, and learns Mishnayis, V'ra, Treifa La'atzmo, and he checks his own treifas, and if it's treif, it's treif. V'shimish Talmidei Chachamim, and learns Babble on Talmud. All of the pasuk says, "Yegia kapecha ki soichel," that you will eat the fruits of your own labor. You won't need from anybody else. You certainly won't need to steal or anything like that. You will work and enjoy and reap the fruits of your own labor. Ashrecha v'tov lach. Rav Zvid Omer zoicha v'nochel shnei olamis. He inherits two worlds, olam hazeh v'olam haba, this world and the next world. Ashrecha b'olam hazeh v'tov lach la'olam haba. Rabbi Lazar, ki avu mishadre le mibei nesia midi, when they would send him anything from the Bei Nesia, from the Nasi, the house of the Nasi, lo shokal, he wouldn't take it, he wouldn't accept it. And when they would invite him, lo azil, he wouldn't go. Omri says, lo kaboy mar de'echi, don't you want me to live? Somebody who hates matanis, who rejects matanis, will live. So why you keep on sending me these gifts? You want me to die? I want to live. Reb Zera ki mishadrele lo shakil. Reb Zera, when they would send him things from the Bei Nesia, he wouldn't take them. Kav mezamnele, but when he was invited, also he would go. Omer is yakurehu dimsakrubi. I'm not doing it for my honor. I'm doing it for their honor. Right? That way, if they're inviting me, it's because they want to have, they want me to be at their. They want me to grace their Suda, right? I mean, it makes sense. You want kind of important people, great Rabbanim, to be at the Suda. He says, I'm not going for myself, I'm going more for them. And I'm not going for myself, I'm going for them. Friends, that was Daf Mem Daled of Masechta Chullin. On Daf Mem Daled of Masechta Chullin, we learned about why Rava ruled that the ox was treif, even though it seems like Rav and Shmuel would have both said that the ox from yesterday's story with the sons of Rav Ukva, Rava ruled that it was treif, shouldn't have been kosher. After all, it's a contradictory double chumrah. And we had learned that if somebody holds like the chumras of Beis Hillel and the chumras of Beis Shammai, aksil b'choshech holech. So why did he paskin that way? We also along the way learned very interesting stuff about baskals, and Tosfos' kasha about, do we hold like baskals, don't we hold like baskals? He gave two answers, and one answer we say we do listen to them, the other answer he said we don't. Anyways, I'm not going to get to that right now, also I'm running a little bit behind. Anyways, so actually Rami Bar Yechezkel came and said that Rava was actually ruling like Rav, because Rav actually says that the turbatz haveshet is not part of the veshet, and you can't slaughter there, and it's usher, it's a treifa bit mashu, and the ox was therefore in fact a treifa. We discussed disconnecting the turbatz veshet from the jaw. We said, according to Shmuel, it's okay to get disconnected. Not if it's totally disconnected. That would be like, what's that called? That would be ikur, simanim. That would be a problem. But if the majority was peeled away, Shmuel says that would be okay. And we discussed measuring the trachea, whether it includes the walls or it doesn't include the walls. We kind of seem to be going like the opinion that says that it's just the whole that we go based on, and that got into a whole story with Rav and Rav Asi and Rav Kahana and Rav Babachana and all sorts of interesting things around that. Friends, that was Daf Mem Daled of Mem Daled, right? Yeah, Masechta Chullin. Have a great day and a great Shabbos. Cheers.